When the headlines first hinted at tension between Landon and Karen Grassle, fans were stunned. How could the beloved Pa and Ma of Little House on the Prairie, the symbols of family unity, be caught in whispers of disagreement and hurt? To many it seemed impossible that behind the gentle laughter and moral lessons of Walnut Grove, a quiet storm had been brewing. But time has a way of revealing what the spotlight hides. Beneath the polished image of television's favorite frontier family were two strong-willed artists fighting for truth, in their craft and in their convictions. What began as creative friction grew into years of silence, pride, and misunderstanding. Yet when life drew its final curtain on Landon's extraordinary journey, his heart spoke differently. The words he shared about Karen Grassle before his passing weren't about scandal anymore. They were about gratitude, forgiveness, and a friendship that endured through pain. It wasn't the ending fans expected. It was quieter, more human, and certainly more moving, because in those final reflections, Landon didn't just reveal what ended their distance. He reminded the world that even broken bonds can heal when truth finds its voice. When Little House on the Prairie premiered in 1974, television found something rare, a story that spoke to the heart. Landon, already loved from Bonanza, stepped into the role of Charles Ingalls, the steady father figure whose wisdom anchored the series. Beside him stood Karen Grassle, a classically trained actress new to television, chosen to embody Caroline Ingalls, the gentle but resilient mother who held the family together. What audiences saw was harmony, warmth, and the perfect American family. What unfolded behind the scenes was far more complex. Grassle admired Landon's vision from the start. He wasn't just an actor, he was the show's creator, writer, and often its director. A man driven by perfection and relentless work ethic. He believed in emotional truth and demanded it from everyone around him. For Grassle, it was both inspiring and intimidating. She later shared that Landon could be charming and funny one moment, then distant or impatient the next. The set thrived under his energy, but it also reflected his moods. The show's success became their shared triumph, yet its pressure built unseen walls between them. During those early years, Little House became a cultural phenomenon. It drew families together each week to watch stories about survival, morality, and love on the frontier. But while the cameras captured an image of unity, Grassle began to feel unseen. She wanted deeper roles, stronger dialogue, a voice equal to her character's importance. Landon, juggling the weight of production, sometimes dismissed her concerns. What started as small creative disagreements quietly hardened into resentment. Crew members and later interviews recalled that Landon's presence on set carried undeniable authority. His relentless pursuit of perfection earned admiration, yet also intimidated those around him. Grassle, shaped by the rigor of stage performance, insisted on maintaining her own voice and presence. Their tension did not stem from ego, but from a shared devotion to their craft. Both demanded excellence and authenticity. Yet the very passion that fueled their work sometimes created distance instead of connection. Despite the friction behind the scenes, their on-screen chemistry remained undeniable. Audiences saw only harmony, unaware that off-camera moments were sometimes shadowed by tension where laughter had once lingered. Landon's magnetic presence drew eyes, yet it was Grassle's steady, quiet strength that gave the series its emotional heart. Even amid disagreement, every scene they shared radiated honesty, a reminder that true artistry can convey what conversation alone cannot resolve. As the seasons rolled on, the success only intensified the strain. The series had become Landon's kingdom, and Grassle's requests for fair pay and creative respect made her appear, in the eyes of some executives, as difficult. In truth, she was simply standing for the value she had earned. Years later, she would speak candidly about the experience, not to tarnish Landon's legacy, but to share the truth of what it meant to be a woman in Hollywood in the 1970s, talented, capable, but often unheard. Behind the curtain, though, There were moments of tenderness that no one saw. Landon, for all his flaws, respected Grassle's talent deeply. He knew she brought something irreplaceable to Caroline Ingalls, a warmth no script could manufacture. And Grassle, despite her frustration, admired his genius, his tireless dedication, and the vision that made Little House on the Prairie a generational treasure. It was this contradiction, admiration entwined with conflict, that defined their early years together. The show's idyllic world masked a very human struggle, two artists learning how to share the same light without casting shadows on each other. The dream was alive, radiant, and unstoppable. But like all dreams built under the strain of perfection, it carried a quiet tension waiting to surface. And when it finally did, the bond between Landon and Grassle would be tested in ways neither could have foreseen. By the late 1970s, Little House on the Prairie had become a television institution, the kind of show families planned their evenings around. Michael Landon was not only the star but the driving force, writing and directing with a precision that left little room for error. Behind the wholesome facade of Walnut Grove, though quiet fault lines were forming, what had once been creative energy began to turn brittle under the pressure of success. Karen Grassle's voice, once welcomed, started to sound inconvenient to the machinery of production. She had fought for her character's dignity, for scenes that showed Caroline Ingalls as more than the supportive wife, yet every suggestion seemed to widen the invisible distance between her and Landon. Crew members noticed the change. Conversations that once ended in laughter now dissolved into silence. For Grassle it was disheartening. For Landon, it was a distraction he couldn't afford. Even with the personal tension between them, every scene they performed together remained impeccable. Their paradoxical bond transformed strain into art, allowing their performances to resonate with authenticity. The warmth audiences perceived was not an illusion. It was born of a complex mix of respect and occasional frustration. Landon's magnetic presence commanded attention, yet it could also be unpredictable. Some days he infused the set with humor and ease. On others, the pressures of deadlines and ratings sharpened his temper and tested those around him. Grassle later reflected that Landon's confidence could feel overwhelming. He carried the weight of the show like a man holding his family's livelihood. And perhaps he was. NBC had given him creative control, and with that came enormous expectation. The burden of success often isolates, and Landon, though surrounded by cast and crew, sometimes seemed alone. His perfectionism, once inspiring, began to alienate those closest to him. The strain reached its peak when Grassle raised the issue of unequal pay. She had learned that, despite her pivotal role, her earnings were significantly lower than those of her male co-stars. What might have been a straightforward discussion instead became a tense standoff, each standing firm in their own pride. For Grassle, it was a matter of fairness. For Landon, it felt like a challenge to his authority. Later, the media painted the episode as bitter conflict, but the deeper truth was simpler and quieter. Two colleagues who had once trusted one another had stopped truly listening. By the early 1980s, the show had run its course. The prairie that once symbolized endless possibility was beginning to feel like a cage. Landon's creative restlessness pushed him toward new projects, while Grassle longed for fresh beginnings of her own. When the series ended, there was no grand farewell between them, only a quiet acceptance that the journey was over. Years would pass before either spoke publicly about what had happened. Landon went on to create Highway to Heaven, finding new purpose in stories of redemption and faith. Grassle returned to the theater, reclaiming her artistic voice. Both carried lessons from those years about power, pride, and the fragile balance between ambition and empathy. Even with all the challenges between them, neither ever dismissed what they had created together. Little House on the Prairie offered more than recognition. It left a lasting legacy that time could not diminish. While audiences remembered only the warmth and smiles on screen, the reality was far richer. Two artists intertwined by both collaboration and conflict, whose shared journey ensured they would always be remembered side by side. What neither of them knew was that time and illness would one day bring those unspoken feelings back to the surface. In the face of mortality, Landon would revisit the past, and what he said about Karen Grassle would leave the world stunned. As the Prairie faded into television history, the distance between Michael Landon and Karen Grassle seemed permanent. The final episodes closed with grace, yet behind the curtain, the bond that once held their creative partnership had thinned to silence. Landon threw himself into new work, channeling his energy into Highway to Heaven, a series that reflected his search for meaning and redemption. Grassle returned to the stage, finding solace in the slower rhythm of theater, where performance was again about truth rather than television schedules. The years that followed were marked by quiet reflection on both sides. The press, still fascinated by the golden era of Little House, occasionally hinted at unresolved tension. Landon, always protective of his privacy, rarely addressed it. Grassle, too, chose her words carefully, preferring to let time do what confrontation could not: soften the memory. Yet, despite the distance, neither completely escaped the shadow of what they had created together. The names Charles and Caroline Ingalls remained forever linked, a reflection of the complex partnership that had shaped them both. By the late 1980s, life challenged Landon in ways no script could have anticipated. His health declined sharply, and the weight of his diagnosis cast every unresolved moment into stark focus. In those quiet months, the confidence that had once defined him softened into deep introspection. Friends recalled a man who had once controlled every set and scene, now reflecting with unexpected honesty, even surprising those closest to him. It was during this time that his thoughts turned to the people who had shaped his journey, and among them, Karen Grassle held a place that memory refused to let go. What he remembered wasn't the arguments or the distance, but the creation itself. The laughter between takes, the moments when their eyes met across the set, and the story came alive. He understood now that conflict had not diminished their work, it had deepened it. Grassle's insistence on integrity, once perceived as defiance, had preserved the moral heart of Little House on the Prairie. The series had been his vision, but her presence had given it balance, grounding its idealism in quiet strength. While the public saw only his confident farewell interviews, those who knew him privately sensed something deeper, a humility born from recognition. Landon had begun to measure his success not by ratings or fame, but by the people who had shared his path. And in that reckoning, Grassle's contribution stood clear. Whatever tension had once clouded their connection, it no longer carried bitterness. Instead, it became part of the truth he carried with him, that collaboration is never simple, that art often demands friction, and that respect can outlast misunderstanding. For Grassle, learning of Landon's illness felt like a distant echo from another era. Years of silence had passed, yet the news awakened old feelings, not bitterness or resentment, but a quiet compassion. Time had reshaped her understanding. The man who had once seemed distant and untouchable now appeared fully human, fragile, and finite. In that awareness, she found a gentle peace, recognizing that their shared story, however strained, had left a meaningful mark. When Landon's life finally came to an end in 1991, the world mourned not just a star but a storyteller who had shaped a generation's understanding of hope. For Grassle, the loss was complex, grief interwoven with gratitude. Whatever words had been left unspoken between them found their resolution not through conversation, but through remembrance. Their silence became its own kind of reconciliation. In the years that followed, when Grassle reflected on the man who had changed the course of her career, her words carried no bitterness, only perspective. And within the legacy of Little House, their story endured. Two artists whose shared dream had transcended discord, and in the end revealed something enduring about forgiveness. When news of Michael Landon's passing spread across the world in the summer of 1991, Tributes flooded in from actors, directors, and fans who had grown up in the glow of his stories. Yet among those tributes, a quieter ripple moved through the industry. Whispers of what Landon had finally admitted in his last reflections about Karen Grassle. It was not scandal or confession that caught attention, but the humility of a man confronting his own humanity. In the months before his death, Landon had begun to re-examine the relationships that had shaped him most. He spoke often of legacy, not the kind that fills award shelves, but the kind measured by integrity, kindness, and memory. Those close to him observed that as his body weakened, his awareness sharpened. The drive that once demanded perfection softened into gratitude, and in that shift, his thoughts returned to the early years of Little House on the Prairie, and the woman who had stood beside him through its creation. Grassle had always represented something rare in Landon's world. She was not dazzled by fame, she was anchored by purpose. Her insistence on depth, her refusal to settle for surface sentiment, had once clashed with Landon's fast-paced production style. Now facing the end, he saw it differently. Her strength had given the show its authenticity. Without her, the Ingalls family might have been sentimental fantasy. With her, it became emotional truth. Those who visited him in his final weeks later described a man at peace, aware that his greatest work had been shaped not by control but by collaboration. For years, their relationship had been portrayed through the lens of conflict. Yet Landon's final reflections offered a different perspective, one of acknowledgement, respect, and understated affection. He did not dwell on regret, but on recognition. The friction had arisen from a shared devotion to the work they both loved. Their craft demanded more than either could give effortlessly, and in understanding this, the old tension shifted into something quietly redemptive. Grassle, learning of his final sentiments through mutual friends and later interviews, responded with grace. She had no desire for vindication. The passage of time had already settled her heart. What moved her most was not that Landon had changed, but that he had understood. His words arrived not as an apology, but as a benediction, a closing chapter written in truth. Fans, hearing of this late reconciliation, were stunned. For decades, Little House on the Prairie had stood as a symbol of family values. Yet few knew that its creators had lived a story just as complicated as the ones they portrayed. Landon's openness near the end reminded the world that even those who seem larger than life are bound by the same need for understanding and forgiveness. In retrospect, those final reflections became part of his legacy. They reframed the narrative, no longer about discord or distance, but about growth. They revealed a man who, in confronting mortality, rediscovered humility, and they gave Grassle's contributions the public respect they had always deserved. Their story, once clouded by misunderstanding, found its resolution not in headlines or interviews, but in memory itself. Landon's acknowledgement became a quiet monument to the power of reconciliation, proof that even fractured relationships can find healing when time and truth align. For viewers who had grown up with their stories, the revelation cast a new, bittersweet light over every rerun. The laughter, the hardships, and the love portrayed on screen gained an added depth behind those performances, were two people who had ultimately found peace, not only with each other but within themselves. In the years that followed Michael Landon's passing, the legacy of Little House on the Prairie only deepened. The series remained more than nostalgia. It became a timeless portrait of family, resilience, and moral strength, values that still echo through reruns decades later. For audiences who once gathered around their television sets, the sight of Charles and Caroline Ingalls represented stability in a changing world. Yet now, with the knowledge of what Landon and Karen Grassle had endured behind the scenes, those familiar images carried an added weight. They were no longer just characters on a screen. They were symbols of imperfection, forgiveness, and grace. Grassle continued to work in theater and film, though she carried the Prairie with her wherever she went. Over the years, she spoke openly yet gently about her experiences, not to rewrite history, but to complete it. Her reflections were not bitter, only human. She remembered Landon not as an adversary, but as a man of immense creativity who sometimes struggled to balance his brilliance with his burdens. In that honesty, she offered something rare in Hollywood: compassion without revision, truth without resentment. Landon's legacy evolved as well. His later work, particularly Highway to Heaven, revealed the softer philosophy that had taken root in his final years. The man once driven by control had turned toward stories of grace, hope, and redemption. Audiences who watched him then saw less of the director and more of the soul beneath the craft. In hindsight, it felt as if his final seasons on screen were not performances at all, but farewells written in real time. When interviews and retrospectives resurfaced decades later, what touched fans most was not the scandal that once surrounded their disagreements, but the quiet resolution that followed. The revelation that Landon had recognized Grassle's strength and that she in turn had chosen forgiveness turned their story into something far larger than a workplace feud. It became a testament to growth, the kind that time alone can deliver. Their dynamic, once misunderstood, now reads like the truest kind of creative partnership: fiery, flawed, and foundational. Without conflict, there might never have been the emotional tension that made Little House on the Prairie so resonant. Without reconciliation, there would be no closure, no lesson left for those who came after. Both had given themselves entirely to the work, and in doing so had revealed something enduring about what it means to strive for truth in art and in life. Even now, it remains visible, in the gentle warmth of Grassle's gaze during quiet moments, in the way Landon's voice balances strength with vulnerability. Each scene carries the mark of their shared challenges and the respect that endured beyond them. Time has turned their creative friction into legend, but what endures most is not the conflict itself. It is the beauty that came from its resolution. For those who grew up with Little House, learning the truth behind the bond between Landon and Grassle does not diminish the magic, it deepens it. It reminds us that even the brightest stories are shaped by shadows, that strength is born from imperfection, and that forgiveness can transform the way we remember. In the end, their legacy was not confined to scripts or awards. It lived in the lessons their story left behind. That talent is nothing without empathy, that leadership means listening, and that love, even when unspoken, has the power to heal what pride once broke. And so the Prairie endures, not as a perfect dream, but as a living memory of two artists who found redemption in understanding. Time has a way of softening even the hardest truths. For Michael Landon and Karen Grassle, what began as a partnership marked by tension and pride became, in the end, a story of forgiveness and quiet grace. Their journey mirrored the very themes that made Little House on the Prairie timeless: family, perseverance, and the redemptive power of understanding. In his final reflections, Landon did not seek to rewrite history. He brought it into clarity. His recognition of Grassle's strength was not a spoken apology, but a truth he finally embraced. For Grassle, whose integrity had never faltered, the years had offered understanding and calm instead of resentment. Together, they left behind more than a television legacy. They created a quiet testament to growth, humility, and the enduring connection that shared artistry can forge between two people. Even now, each scene they performed resonates like an ongoing conversation across the years, a quiet reminder that forgiveness can come at any moment, and that love, expressed subtly, endures beyond all else. For more emotional stories, check out this video.